Thank you to all of you for continuing to be here and supporting AGOA. For some of us, it's a life work. I'm looking at our good friends in the room. They've been here since the beginning and expect to be here till the end. Some of you are wondering what's new, what's changing in the landscape. In this panel, we're going to address 3 technical areas, but it depends on all of you joining us back in the room. I know the coffee is really nice back there, but I'm sure you've had enough. We have guests online joining us from around the world, South Africa, Washington State, from the middle of the US, and Rahul, I don't know, I think you're in Dubai, aren't you? So we have a really fantastic lineup of speakers, but I'm going to start with those of us on stage. And I'm just looking at the back of the room. I think you're so busy making deals happen that you can't come sit down. That's okay, we understand. AGOA is about trade, isn't it? And trade is about deals, isn't it? So I think today this panel wants to talk about what's new, what's happening, what are the opportunities for scaling. And many of you who have spent time as we all do on the continent of Africa, AGOA is really about hope. It's about hope for growing economies. And if we don't have belief and hope that there's opportunities to increase trade, businesses don't invest, financiers don't put their money on the line, and by all means, analysts have nothing to analyze. And so we want to talk about successes, what's been happening, what are some of the trends in different sectors. And as was mentioned by our esteemed opening speakers, of course, Florie Lizer and Secretary Blinken talked about economic growth and drivers of business growth for consumers to have better choices. And I think at the bottom, at the end of all of the trade conversations and the technical barriers to trade, and the last panel mentioned this, we want safer food, safer products, and sustainable products for consumers. And so a lot of the complexities of trade come to consumer choices. So I, for one, believe that the discussion about renewing AGOA is really about refreshing and re-envisioning what trade opportunities, products, businesses, what's new, and how can we really accelerate growth. And I'm looking at Joss. There's everyone talks a lot about the apparel sector. We'll come to that. But in Africa, we talk a lot about food and agriculture as well. And there's been a lot of hiccups and fluctuation in pricing, which is also a part of trade sensitivity. And then we're talking about financial markets and efficiency and more competitive trade. And this is always a barrier for small businesses to get the kind of financing and investments they need to be able to do more, deliver more, and trade more. And I think there are new institutional tools and support mechanisms which are significant improvements over where we were when AGOA started out 20 years ago, don't you think, Florie? So I want to continue to come back to this theme of real growth. So let me start out with my dear friend and colleague Eckhart, and just give us some of what you're seeing, some of the trends, new products, what is being traded. And you and I were talking about 200 AGOA eligible products being traded of more than $1 million of trade just in this year. So give us your ideas, Eckhart, and then I'm assuming that all of you are super internet savvy and looked up all the speakers and all the topics, and I'm not going to go into detailed introductions and bore you. So you can catch up with me. If you haven't, come talk to us at the end. Over to you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Before I start, first of all, thank you to the Corporate Council for hosting us, or the USIP as well. And Led, where's Led? But certainly a special thanks to Led, who's always just really the machinery behind these events. So thank you, Led, for all of that. Vanessa, thank you. I think we often, in terms of AGOA, we talk about market access, and of course it is about market access. And as a result of AGOA, there are virtually no import tariff barriers left. It's only about 3%, a couple of tariff lines that still are subject to an import duty. AGOA obviously doesn't cover all of that, but that is because 40% or 37% or so of tariff lines are already duty-free into the United States. So really, tariffs are no longer an issue as a result of AGOA. There are many other barriers remaining. Market access isn't about just preferential tariff access, but it's also about navigating all these other barriers, especially around standards and technical barriers and sanitary and phytosanitary issues and so on and so forth. But if one looks at the data, AGOA has actually had an impact on many products. It's not just oil or textiles and a couple of agricultural products. There are around about 200 products at the HTS 8 level, which is basically at the disaggregated tariff line level at which duties are charged, that have been exported to the United States under AGOA in 2023 at more than $1 million. Now, $1 million doesn't seem like that much coming from a continent, but to individual exporters and businesses in Africa, it might be a lot. It might be the majority of their business. So it is really having an impact. Of course, there are the big numbers from the textile sector, even from the oil industry. Oil doesn't need AGOA to be sold. But certainly the textile sector, the agricultural sector, there are many success stories as a result of AGOA. For example, oranges into the United States under AGOA are coming mainly from South Africa. The second largest supplier to the United States of oranges. Pecan nuts from Kenya and South Africa together account for the majority of the US import market. So there are many success stories if one delves into the details a little bit, and these are really having an impact on the African side. And of course, to the willing buyer in the United States that is choosing to buy from Africa under AGOA when they could be sourcing from anywhere in the world.
Fantastic. So remember this at Thanksgiving when you're making your pecan pie, that those are African pecans. I used to be only talking about cashews, but now I can talk about macadamia and pecan, and I'm expanding. So Babajide has joined us. Babajide Sodipo. AfroExim Bank is, I don't think, very well known as you and I were discussing. And what's so interesting about AfroExim Bank and the financial sector in Africa is it's been changing significantly, and trade and investment tools, mechanism, platforms, digitization are absolutely essential for accelerating trade and investment and growth, and we talked about this. And if you can just speak very briefly to what you're seeing as opportunities for scale. And we discussed, and this is something that, Flory, we talked about many, many years, which is if African trade more amongst African countries, that's also going to grow exports, and it's going to grow capacity for businesses to trade around the world. And we are seeing a lot more of that now than we had many years ago. So, Babajide, if you could just give us some insights. I know you would like to speak for 3 hours, but I'm going to give you 3 minutes to give us your brilliant examples.
All right. Thank you very much. And again, thanks to the Corporate Council for inviting us to this very important session. So very quickly, I think what we as AfroExim Bank have learned from our decades, over 3 decades experience of financing trade on the continent, as well as trade between Africa and the rest of the world, is that market access is not enough. And I can go through a whole thesis on all the elements, but I'm going to just highlight 2 additional things, which is critical as we think about AGOA, as we try to implement AGOA, as we try to ensure that AGOA achieves its potential. And those are 2 other things: trade facilitation, as well as investment. Trade facilitation in the context of, even if you have all the market access in the world, if you do not put in place the tools, the instruments that will help to facilitate trade, the products will just sit in the warehouse. They're certainly not going to get to the markets where they're needed. To that extent, AfroExim Bank has put in place 2 or 3 initiatives which really attempts to drive trade facilitation across the continent. First is the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, which Commissioner Muchanga mentioned. It is important because at the end of the day, it's people that do businesses. Buyers have to meet sellers. There has to be opportunities to understand what is available in the market, what the needs of the buyers are, and you need to have that kind of framework where you can connect buyers and sellers. So the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, it's not only physical, it's also virtual, which takes place through the year. Then the other particular problem Africa had was the issue of payments, where for a lot of African countries, they have to trade local currency to dollars and so on and so forth. So in that regard, the bank put in place something called the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which essentially helps to facilitate payments in African currencies, again, making trade easy. On the investment point, it became also very clear and very important that if you wanted to be able to diversify your export profile, if you want to be able to trade and export the right kind of things, then absolutely you need an investor or investors that will go to invest in developing the productive capacity that is necessary to create the products and the goods that you trade. So quite sometimes we don't hear enough about AGOA as an investment facilitation tool. And I think absolutely this audience is the audience that will fully understand the potential of AGOA as an investment facilitation tool. In that case, of course, AfCFTA have done a number of things, including creating an equity vehicle, our Fund for Export Development for Africa, which helps to invest equity in export-led sectors, particularly, again, ensuring that these investments catalyze the scaling up of production to take advantage of the market access under schemes such as AGOA. Thank you.
I asked him 3 times, is it really true you invest and take equity positions? He had to reassure me, so I'm sure you're all wondering the same thing and Googling this right now. Do you have access? Who has access? What are the conditions? We'll argue about this later. But
Fund for Export Development for Africa.
Thank you. So I believe that on our panel, Raul, actually, Mittal might have tried to use your fund for Arise, and maybe, Raul, I'll come to you, and talking about scale. Arise has really attempting to do what most of us thought was unimaginable, which is the infrastructure, large-scale investments, whether it be processing, warehousing, added value on the continent, which is required, as you all mentioned previously, to increase trade. And Rahul, I know only a little bit to be dangerous about what Arise is doing, but in 3 minutes, I think if you can just give us your views from Arise's work and investment. What can governments do more as well as private sector to scale up trade and investment between Africa and the U.S.? Oh, you're on mute, so we would love to hear you, but I think you can unmute. Thank you.
So, thank you, Vanessa. A very good morning to everybody. As you said, Arise is probably not very well known in that part of the world. So let me take a few seconds to talk about us. We are largely infrastructure developer in Africa. We design, finance, build and operate large integrated industrial zones in African countries in partnership with the state governments. We are currently present in 12 countries where our zones are either developed or under construction. And we have talks with several other governments about setting up zones and looking at a pan-African presence in times to come. And Vanessa, to your doubt on whether AfCFTA takes equity or not, they are on board Arise as a shareholder through PEDA. So you have some proof of what they say sitting right here. Now, for us, Africa has been largely an exporter of raw materials. And what we are trying to do is change that by building large-scale infrastructure projects, which look at doing value-added products based on what are locally available raw materials in the country are. And when in these zones, when we look at bringing investors, they largely talk about 3 things: availability of raw materials, the cost of production in the country, and the third is market access. And this market access is a very critical point where AGOA comes in, and also Now, what is happening with AfCFTA? Both with AfCFTA and AGOA, tariff barriers get reduced or eliminated, and which helps us, the investors, to access a large consumer base. But then tariff barriers are not the only thing which is hindering trade now. There exists equally big animal called non-tariff barriers, which hinder trade. While on the continent itself, AfCFTA Secretariat is working towards eliminating some of those. I think probably these barriers are something which is affecting trade within AGOA as well. If you look at today what US imports from Africa, agri products are less than $1 billion. And of this $1 billion also, a large part of it is cocoa products coming from Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. And therefore, I would not refrain from saying that the agri business into US is minimal, and therefore it has a huge potential to grow. The one part which needs to be addressed is the non-tariff barriers. How can governments on both the sides work on eliminating those? How can industry be supported on that? And the second part, I think, which has worked well in case of at least the cocoa sector, is US companies coming up and setting shop in Africa. Investors like Cargill who have come and have started manufacturing in Africa for export to Africa. I think that could also be a huge step to facilitating trade. It's not about just African investors or African manufacturers exporting to Africa. It could be US investors coming into Africa, setting up shop and selling, manufacturing for Africa and for US. And if you look at these markets in an integrated manner, I think we can go a long way.
Thank you, Rahul. I'm sorry, your connection is not ideal, so I think a lot of people didn't hear everything that you were saying. You can share some of your comments, I hope, online on social media, and I hope you're all tweeting your arguments about every speaker, so we have a nice debate. I would like to go next to Wunmi, if you don't mind, and let's talk a little bit about inclusivity and what small businesses and industry associations. Rahul, I see you. Are the other speakers still online? I don't know if our technical is following, but some of the points you were making about large-scale investments required to accelerate processing into trade also comes to consumer awareness and also buyer willingness to buy from different sectors. So, Wunmi, can you talk a little bit about the SMEs and the inclusivity and the example of the shea industry and how the opportunity to grow U.S.-Africa trade in your view and include the benefit all the way down to the pickers and growers on the continent? Over to you, Wunmi.
Thank you so much. I should kick off by saying thank you to the Corporate Council for hosting this event and USIP as well. I'm standing on all protocol observed, and just to really, by way of introduction, just give a brief synopsis of the Global Shea Alliance. So we are an industry association representing the voice of about 849 members from 36 countries. And I think that for us, opportunities to leverage and improve the utilization of AGOA is quite important. We're talking about the inclusivity. A few things that Rahul mentioned that I'm going to just project from is really talking about, opportunities to do a bit more than just exporting raw materials out of Africa and ensuring that we're having a lot more value addition. In the shea sector, we're fortunate to have a unique product that is natural, renewable, and it's sustainable. And this product actually meets the interest of a lot of U.S. consumers. So there's that opportunity for U.S. consumers to be connected with shea, which is purely indigenous to Africa and to some of the sub-Saharan African countries as well. when you think about the structure of the sector in the past, like I said, it was really focused on just exporting raw materials. But when we're looking at trade and making sure that trade is more inclusive, a big part of that is ensuring that women play a role in trade, and they are more visible in the global trade, in the global trade platform. And not just women, but also youths, young Africans who really are very eager to be put to work. And one of the things that we're trying to do is really build programs that support women's participation within the global trade system. And a key example is ensuring that market access is present. So how do we continue to integrate women suppliers, women collectors into supply chain systems of US companies, for example. And that starts with things like capacity building for women, helping them understand the trade market in itself, helping them understand the use of shea beyond their own communities, helping them come together to be formed into cooperatives and do business together. And connecting them in a way that they could negotiate contracts with US companies, they could understand the trade terms, they could understand the need for quality. Beyond that is also supporting them with the right infrastructure, so ensuring that there's something as simple as a warehouse put in place for them to be able to aggregate. And we see that addressing some of those aggregation challenges really enhance the trade between US companies and women collectors. And beyond that is also access to finance, which has been a big limitation for women to trade. A lot of access to finance that women are leveraging right now are from private sector partners. How do we diversify beyond that and ensure that women can access finance to be able to trade independently? So those are some of the interventions that we're doing as an alliance to ensure that there's more inclusive participation of women and youth within the sector. What we're seeing as well is looking at opportunities to also bring in more US companies into the market. We'll see a lot more presence on the ground. I know Raul mentioned that it's really not just about US African companies exporting, but also how do we attract foreign direct investment from US companies? And we're seeing a lot of that activities within the shea sector. A US company, Bunge, under the terms of AGOA, actually also just invested multi-million-dollar to develop a processing plant in Africa. And that in itself is really helping addressing some of Africa's key issues like job opportunities for young people, and really also ensuring that we're creating more sustainable trade within the sector.
Thanks, and I'm glad you brought the Bunge example, and there are many larger investments processing substantially more. I think now over 70% of shea is processed on the continent compared to where we were nearly 20 years ago, where we were under 10%. So it's a significant growth area. And the other thing that I believe, Erica, you can speak to this also. Erica Joubert is speaking to us from South Africa. Westgrow, I don't know, maybe you're on an airplane. Who knows? These days you could be somewhere else. But Erica, if you can talk to us a bit, because you've been doing this trade promotion and facilitation for a number of years, and I know you've always got great examples of areas that could be growth sectors and where more investment would be required, and where governments also can lean in further. So over to you, Erica, and thank you, Wunmi.
Everybody in the US and for the rest of the world, possibly good afternoon. First of all, thank you, Vanessa, and of course, Laird from the Corporate Council. Appreciate the invite. Just as a quick introduction, my name is Erica. I'm the head of trade promotion at Westgrow, and our role is to support Western Cape business exporting their goods and services to the rest of the world. For those that's not familiar, the Western Cape is a province. It's the fourth largest province within South Africa. Vanessa, as it relates to your particular question in terms of investment and in which particular sectors to invest, and maybe to Eckhart's point earlier, that there's, I know the previous panel talked about oil and gold, etc., but what we're seeing specifically in the Western Cape is the Maybe take a step back, as in the South African context specifically, it's the second largest utilizer of AGOA, with about 26% of all South African exports under AGOA, and it range from motor vehicles to ferroalloys to citrus to jewelry to yachts to engine parts to wine. And then within the Western Cape province in particular, 5 of the top 10 AGOA exports originate mostly exclusively from the Western Cape province. Again, this is jewelry, citrus, engine parts, wine, boats, nuts. So we're seeing a real uptick and outside of natural resources that's being traded to the US. And it's not only raw materials, it's also finished products. So from and then from an investment perspective, what we've started seeing and the support that company needs, and Nimi talked about that earlier, is really smaller businesses that is looking to add value to their products. They don't only want to export the raw material, but having that support and the investment needed in order to put that production facilities in place in order to export that value-added materials. I wanted to use one example, and it's actually a recent example, and it's also a story about collaboration, and it's pomegranates. And a few years has been identified about the pomegranate opportunity with from South Africa to the US, and we have a SMME in one of our small towns within one of the districts, Oudtshoorn. It's called Karupak. And they are working with pomegranate farmers. And they really wanted, and they had this vision in order to not only export raw or fresh produce, but being able to add value-added products to that. And this particular facility then, with the collaboration of USAID Africa Trade and Investment, the Southern Buy-in Activity, who's responsible for match-made grant funding under AGOA, helped this particular facility through a grant match, and it was a processing plant. It was 25 million, 10 million from USAID, and then the Karupak shareholders offered the others, was able to actually put up this facility and are now producing not only the raw material or the fresh produce, but being able to add the value-added product, which is juice, liquor, skin, it's a hair range, and then and now being with the support and technical support from USAID, the agencies such as Westgrow, on national bodies such as the DTIC, putting the packaging together, putting the labeling together, and working with provider to ensure that this product is ready for the US and being able to export to the US.
I love these concrete examples, and I hope you're all taking notes and tweeting about some of these wins, because there's hundreds of people, thousands of hours, and millions of dollars go into each of these trade agreements, and each of you has seen how much work goes in and how quickly some of these deals can be lost, right? And we're talking about competitiveness. These markets aren't static. People come and go out of different markets. I'm looking at British Robertson, who's the coordinator for Prosper Africa and the lead in thinking about two-way trade, right? And this is not your panel, but I just wanted to loop in this thinking, which has evolved, that the two-way trade wasn't initially our focus. We were really looking on Africa exporting more, and then wait a minute, but the U.S. has to benefit to make this trade agenda really continue and thrive. And so I want to come to Jim Kreepbaum, because Jim, you've been sitting, for many years on the U.S. side of trying to get more people to buy from Africa and more U.S. companies to invest in Africa. And Jim, would you give us a few of your insights on some of this? We're talking about market facilitation, trade facilitation, technical barriers to trade. We can get into very general, complicated language, but I know, Jim, that having been through these transactions, what are a few takeaways and examples from your experience over the years in using these trade agreements?
Well, thank you, Vanessa, and thank you for the council for the invitation and the chance to add value to your efforts. The trade it's the challenge, and there's lots of challenges. You all understand the challenges that are out there. The keys to open those challenges are to ensure that you have a product that has a niche, not trying to sell another commodity. You talk about value add. How do you add value to make your product different? How do you find a a product that is not going to compete directly with product that's produced in the United States or imported from Mexico. Blueberries, for example, we talked about blueberries the other day because blueberries are global trade phenomenal because they're booming everywhere. And blueberries are moving from Africa into Canada, but not into the US. And the reason that's happening is because the first shipments of product coming in out of Africa to the US on the blueberries didn't meet the standards. They didn't have the sanitation standards and created some real problems once the product got here. And the competition that they're facing is, Mexico has come in to fill that void with the product in the time frame. You look at the citrus, and citrus has a window of opportunity. There's a time frame where the citrus can move into this market. So you got to kind of look at the markets and figure out where is the opportunity as far as a window that's open, as far as a demand that's there, identify the niche. How do you differentiate your product? We've seen some success in honey, for example. We did a program out of Kenya and Zambia, and it took a long time to get the product into the U.S. market. And it's not something that happens on the time frame of a USAID project a lot of times. In fact, the other day I had a call from a guy who we worked with several years ago, and he says, I'm going to be in Seattle and I want to buy you lunch. It's like, okay. He bought me lunch, and at lunch he says that, we started this program about 7 years ago. He says we're now up to $2 million in sales a year out of Zambia into the U.S. because of the contacts and the relationships that were made. What he did, though, was find a niche. He was able to move an organic honey, truly certified organic. And that's one of the things. There's a lot of product in the African continent that is produced organically by default, but is not certified. And the challenge is, how do you get small stakeholders and small farmers to get their land certified? But what he was able to do was find that niche, capitalize, and stay persistent. One of the things that doesn't happen, we go to trade shows, we do trade events, we do market linkages, and 6 months after we do that, the companies aren't communicating with each other. And what happens is all the product that's being sold in the U.S. is buying it from somewhere. There's another supplier, whether it's a domestic supplier or an international supplier, that's currently meeting that demand. So what has to happen is that current supplier has to make a mistake. There has to be a flaw, there has to be a crop failure, there has to be a price change, there has to be a shipment delay, there has to be a shipping issue where the containers can't get there. When that happens, the companies need to be able to and be in a position to capitalize on that. That doesn't happen the day of a trade show. That happens a year later, that happens 2 years later. So persistency, keeping up that dialogue. One of the things that the people, particularly, and I'm talking primarily on food, people don't understand when you come into the U.S. market, you're not going to sell directly to a Walmart or a Costco or a Kroger. You're going to sell through a broker, through a distributor. And brokers are, they're a dime a dozen, but the one that you find that works with you is worth gold. And that's, you can't do the U.S. market in a lot of products without a broker or a company that's going to handle your imports directly. One of the things that the people need to look at, and I know that the Global Shea Alliance has been successful, some of the companies have been successful, is e-commerce. For hitting the niche markets, hitting the diaspora, if I'm looking for a shea butter product that is produced in Africa, I'm not going to find that at my local store. I'm going to go online to Amazon, I'm going to go online to Walmart, or I'm going to go to some of the other specialty and niche sites to try and find that product. So, and there are companies here that handle e-commerce, that do all your, one of the things on e-commerce, you don't want to be on page 56 of a search engine, you want to be on page 1. And there are companies that we work with that spend their time and their money making sure you get there. So you're there to talk. Vanessa, go ahead.
No, I know we're out of time, and I'm going to get the boot here any minute from our good friends at CCA. But Jim, you've summarized some of the practicalities very well. I just want to come back to Eckhard, and I know you can help me summarize some of the key points in terms of the government and the U.S. Congress and for tomorrow's ministerial, some of the key takeaways and bullets that can help this conversation move forward to inspire governments to help ease trade and to let the private sector do the work they have to do.
Well, sometimes the question is often asked, how can we improve utilization of AGOA, or how can we improve AGOA to improve utilization? And I think the focus does not need to be on improving AGOA per se. AGOA is great. It is covering a lot of products, pretty much all of the products that aren't already duty-free into the United States. But we can focus our effort, or effort can be focused on supporting the process of navigating standards, for example, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, protocols. For example, I mean, I know South Africa is a successful citrus, orange exporter to the United States, second largest supplier to the United States, but 85% of the area where oranges are grown in South Africa do not have permission to be exported to the United States. Same with avocado. There are no protocols in place yet. So there are technical barriers to trade that really deserve attention. Exporting is challenging. The AGOA legislation is not going to do away with these standards that the United States maintains, but support to navigate these standards. I think there's a lot of demand for this kind of support, and I know the United States and through development agencies, Prosper Africa, etc., are already supporting that process. But that is certainly something that I would focus on to see a better utilization of AGOA preferences, always keeping in mind that the beneficiaries are on both sides of the Atlantic. For every successful exporter, there's a happy importer on the United States side. So it is really two-way beneficiation, or two-way benefits on this.
He's so eloquent. And we have an amazing panel, and I'm going to ask all of you to show your great faces online, to thank you all so much for your time, your hard work, the energy you put into this. And I hope that out of this conversation, there's a few deals getting ready to be signed, a few more investments that are getting ready to go through, and a lot more motivation on our governments who have to do the really hard work to make it easier for all these businesses to trade and to do business together. Thank you so much.
Well done.
Okay, thank you very much once again for Vanessa for a great panel as well. Thank you very much. If Paul and Lilauti, Paul, thank you very much for coming. There we go, perfect timing. And I think we're also going to have Victor online. Paul, if I might ask you to sit at the end. I'm Laird Trieber, a senior advisor at the Corporate Council on Africa, and I'm very, very pleased to welcome you to this next panel. We're just finishing the arrival. Lilauti, welcome. Thank you so much. And I think we have Victor online as well. So this panel is a really, I think, a crucial panel in terms of, we've talked quite a bit this morning about putting AGOA and AfCFTA into a broader context. We've talked quite a bit on the last panel in particular about some specific examples of some of the wins, also some of the potentials, et cetera. And I think with this panel, what we'd like to do is get a little bit more at the how do we get there. And so this is a panel where we're going to focus on trade associations and the role that they play, as well as you heard mentioned earlier, the President's Advisory Commission on Doing Business in Africa. And so in some ways this works out quite well in terms of we have a mix of African associations on one side and then critical members of the PAC-DBIA on the other. So maybe if I could just very briefly to introduce those on the panel. Lilauti Rajmussen-Jusuri is the director from the Mauritius Export Association. We have online, I do believe, Victor Orgalo is the deputy CEO from the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, KEPSA. We have Paul at the end, Paul Ryberg from the Africa Coalition for Trade. We have Rahama Wright from Yelin, who is, I believe, the chair of the PAC-DBIA. We have Kate Tulenko, Dr. Kate Tulenko from Corvus Health, also a PAC-DBIA member. And we have Brian Dawson, who is head of emerging markets in the International Government Affairs Group for Google. So thank all of you for being with us today. I realize we have, in a possibly short time, to give, I think, our audience some idea of the richness that associations bring to this whole equation. But if I could, I'd like you perhaps to offer us your thoughts as kind of this crucial intermediary between member companies who are interested either on the African side or the American side. They've heard these kinds of presentations, they see the opportunities, they want to get involved, but they need to find those kinds of connections. They need some of that background. They need to hear a little bit about some of that culture that we heard about previously in terms of how do you make a deal. And so associations are a critical piece in fulfilling that role and in promoting opportunities. So based as associations, perhaps if we could start on the African side, would be looking for your thoughts, having worked with AGOA, having worked with companies and exploring opportunities, for your specific, if you have 2 or 3 recommendations for what might be done to improve or enhance AGOA as well. And also, if you might offer just some thoughts, just a minute or two, of where AGOA fits in into the broader context. We heard a lot about AfCFTA in the first couple of panels. Lalautu, if we could start with you.
Thank you, Led. Thank you, CCA, for inviting me and sharing my views. Because of time constraint, I will be brief. AGOA for sure has been a huge success in terms of US and Africa trade. I can testify it by far. I've seen AGOA 20 years before and now. There's lots of trade happening in different areas, in different level of products. We've seen it in bringing its contribution to employment. I always say industrialization is something that not create only direct job, but indirect job and feed in families, and the families have the means to educate their kids. That's where AGOA boils down to. So AGOA has been a success. It's time to renew it. And for me, eventually, if you want to have some thoughts about some changes that we can bring to AGOA now that we are all thinking about the renewal of AGOA, is I think we need to bring more certainty to AGOA in terms of the AGOA eligibility period. Every year, each country has to go back again in terms of the AGOA review process, and I think that need to be reviewed. It need to be at least done every 3 years, 2 or 3 years, because it's very important for that country's certainty and predictability. And from a private sector point of view, if investment has to flow in, it's very important that we have certainty. We give that investor certainty. Eventually, I will not abstain myself from coming back on a very important issue, which is graduation. And yesterday, I was in a meeting at Kendra's office, and we talked about it. And something very, one sentence I retain, AGOA being a success cannot punish success. So it's very important that the graduation issue be addressed, because it's not only a Mauritian issue, it can be anybody's issue in the years to come, because we wish that all African countries, the economy grow. So we don't want AGOA to punish success and successful countries. That's on my thought in terms of AGOA. Then I'll come back to your second point so that I allow everybody to come in terms of the ACFTA. I followed ACFTA because as an association, we work with our government in all our trade negotiation, and I followed ACFTA right from the beginning. ACFTA is a wonderful piece of trade agreement uniting the entire African continent. But ACFTA, where it's not yet finalized, the negotiations are not yet finalized. There are certain rules of origin has not yet been finalized, and there are 3 main chapters, and it's automobile, textile, and apparel. There is 1 more field. Once the ACFTA is finalized, then I think we discuss about the synergy between ACFTA and AGOA. And they both trade packages. Our trade agreement packages have commonalities. They talk about regional integration. They talk about industrialization, and that's wonderful. And I think that once this is done, and I think that we are speeding up in our negotiation to finalize those pending chapters, once this is done, then let's get around the table and start to discuss about it. And I think that will really spur industrialization of the African continent, bringing investment and all the multiplier effect to the African continent. One last point, and that was on what we discussed at Kendra's meeting yesterday, again, in terms of investment, and I keep telling you that, Laird. It's very important that the US investors get to know Africa. Africa, according to the World Bank, is the second continent with a young population. Otherwise, every country is being plagued by aging population. Look at Japan, they are losing population. So it's extremely important that we increase the visibility of African countries to the US investors. And that's all my point.
Lalapti, thank you very much. I really appreciate the very particular suggestions. Victor, are you with us online?
Yes, Light, I'm online.
Okay. Please,
yes.
if we could turn the floor over to you, if you have some specific suggestions for AGOA, as well as any thoughts on putting AGOA into a broader context.
And thanks a lot to the previous fellow panelists. Good evening here. It's already dark, and struggling a little bit with my room is not well lit, so if I appear so dark on the screen, please just apologize. I apologize in advance, but I believe maybe you can still hear me. There's a context I want to paint. I know you gave me 3-4 minutes, but there's a context I really want us to paint about the AGOA, just like WTO that started in 1995 here. AGOA is 24 years old today, and things have changed. I bought my first phone in 2000 when AGOA started, and it was not a smartphone. We've moved over the last 24 years to a totally new and different global economic context. The challenges that AGOA wanted to solve in 2000 probably have even been compounded into much more difficult challenges today than they were, or some have been resolved. So part of what we really would want to do as a trade association is to look at the last 24 years. What have been the gains? What were the objectives of AGOA? We tend to nuance a lot around trade preferences, but we are forgetting the other tenets of AGOA, which really never feature in such conversations. So I think that in what's next for AGOA would be to look at, can we have all the 4-5 objectives of AGOA and rate how, by having AGOA, we've been able to meet those objectives. So let's keep everything in the picture, and I think, because when I talk about renewal, remember it's been renewed 4 times, but the renewals are always just around preferential trade scheme part of it, other than the rest. We cannot trade in an environment of no peace. We cannot trade in an environment where there is human rights abuse. We cannot trade in an environment where we do not match with the pace of the different changes. Right now, in a digital economy, AI is here. We are exploring Africa Continental Free Trade Area, things that were not there in 2000. So how can we remodel AGOA to match the current and the future imagined global economy, African economy? The trade preference hasn't quite worked well, and we need to know why. Have we been building those capacities that would help Africans to explore AGOA more. If we want to create jobs in Africa through AGOA, how many of US investors are coming to Africa, to Kenya, to Uganda, Tanzania, Nigeria, as a result of AGOA? I think as a trade association, those are kind of statistics that I would really want to have before we can talk about modernizing AGOA. So what are the options that we really, there are only 3 options that we probably could have. And one is a very unimaginative option of, let's just renew AGOA. Let's not bother about how it has worked. Let's just renew it. I mean, that's maintaining the status quo and renewing it, a very unimaginative option. The other one is, let's just do nothing and let AGOA expire. And then the third one is, under the current context, would AGOA of the 2015 be sufficient right now for Africans in 2024, 2025, going into 2030? That's not the same thing that we would want today. So let us look at the new developments that have happened in the 4 phases of renewal of AGOA. What has changed? And for Kenya, that, for instance, as Vision 2030, how could we bring in AGOA in a different fashion that then facilitates export-oriented Kenyan businesses, not internally looking businesses? We are keen on being a competitive African region. Can AGOA be remodeled to work with us on that path of being globally competitive region? My predecessor panelist just talked about the changing demographics. In 2050, every 1 person in 4 will be an African. How do we take advantage of that? The geopolitical changes that have already we can see and we are aware of, the entry of China into Africa and how that could be changing the geopolitical relationships. That was not the case in 2000 when we were signing AGOA, but it's a very important factor to take into account. If you're talking about security, if you're talking about human rights, if you're talking about governance, if you're talking about debt in Africa, are all these relationships burdening Africa the more, or theirs? Africa is not here to be saved. Africa is here to be partnered with. Right. I think the mentality of saving Africa should get out of the equation. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of things have changed, and as an association, we are keen on what could be at the new AGOA. Let us reimagine US-Africa relationship through a different a Gen Z AGOA.
Okay.
A Gen Z AGOA. Yes.
Great.
So, thanks a lot if I overshot my time.
No, Victor, thank you very much. You've given us a lot, I think, to consider. And Paul, I'm so sorry to turn to you with 2 or 3 minutes with, do you have some thoughts on what a new Gen Z accord or approach to AGOA might be? Again, in 2 or 3 minutes.
No. So, our organization, the African Coalition for Trade, is a trade association of trade associations for the most part. We were founded in 1998 to fill an empty seat at the table when AGOA was being created, because the US government was participating, the African governments were participating, the US private sector was participating, but the African private sector was not. And that was mainly because there were very few African companies that were big enough and focused enough on US exports at that time to justify participation. So ACT was created to bring together trade associations in Africa. Most of our members are national level trade associations that are interested in trading with the US under AGOA. And that's been a self-selecting process, so most of our members come from those countries that have succeeded in taking advantage of AGOA, and most of them come from those sectors that have been successful under AGOA, which is mainly textiles and apparel. AGOA has worked very well in creating hundreds of thousands of direct jobs in Africa that otherwise didn't exist, and well over 1 million indirect jobs just in the textile and apparel sector alone. That's the good news. The bad news is those jobs are in jeopardy. And the reason they're in jeopardy is because of the uncertainty over whether AGOA will be renewed. Orders in the textile and apparel sector are typically negotiated more than a year in advance, and new investment typically is planned more than 2 years in advance. Well, we are now 1 year and 3 months away from expiration, and so the orders are drying up. In 2022, we set a new record for the volume of apparel trade under AGOA. In 2023, the level of trade contracted by 21%. In 2024, through June, it's fallen by another 30%. And there's only one reason for that: uncertainty. So the most important thing that we as a group can do is to send the message to Congress that AGOA needs to be renewed now, not next year. Secretary Blinken said next year we need to renew AGOA. Well, he's dead wrong. It has to happen this year or we will lose more than 1 million jobs in Africa. The second message that I want to convey in terms of changes to AGOA, there's some consideration being given, some talk on the Hill, to modifying the third country fabric provision. As I mentioned, the sector that has been most successful under AGOA has been the textile and apparel sector. And the reason it has been successful is because it has the most generous rules of origin of any U.S. trade program, the third country fabric rule. That rule accounts for something like 90% of the apparel imports under AGOA. If the third country fabric rule is not renewed, quite frankly, from the perspective of my members, Congress, don't bother renewing AGOA, because AGOA without the third country fabric rule does not work. We want to encourage investment in the upstream in yarn spinning and fabric production. But the way you do that is by growing the downstream. You cannot micromanage it. If there's a customer base to buy the cotton yarn and fabric, then investment will be made in producing the cotton yarn and fabric in Africa, because it makes economic sense in terms of efficiencies to have that production take place in Africa. The other dichotomy that I have to highlight, though, is man-made fiber. Today, man-made fiber garments are the growth sector. They account today for more than half of the apparel being imported under AGOA. But there is zero man-made fiber production in Africa. And the reason for that is it's extremely capital intensive and extremely technologically advanced. It will eventually come, but it will take time. So any effort to scale back on man-made fiber use in Africa will be extremely counterproductive. Thank you.
Paul, thank you very much. Commissioner Muchanga charged us with coming up with some very specific recommendations. I think all three of you have done that. And so, Rahama, as we turn to you, we've heard from, if you will, sort of an African perspective, and the PAC-DBIA has played a really important role in galvanizing U.S. interest in greater African trade and investment, as well as things like AGOA. And so we'll turn to you for your perspectives.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to say thank you to CCA and the Peace Institute for inviting us to be part of this conversation. As Lard said, my name is Rahma Wright. I am the founder and CEO of Yaleen, and what our company does is we work with women-owned cooperatives of plant-based ingredients in West Africa, Ghana, where we ethically source value-added ingredients. We create a line of products that we sell to U.S. retailers, and through our business model, we increase women's income 5 times their country's minimum wage, giving them a living wage for the very first time. In addition to my role there, I also serve on the President's Advisory Council on Doing Business in Africa, where I co-chair the council with Citigroup. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the PAC-DBIA, we are a private sector council made up of 24 members. and we advise the Secretary of Commerce and the President on how to improve trade engagement between the U.S. and Africa. And so today I'm joined by my colleagues, Kate and Breon, and we're going to preview some of the recommendations that we plan to share with the Secretary of Commerce in the coming weeks. So let me start by saying that as a council, we fully support the swift renewal of AGOA. To my colleague over there, swift renewal. We recommend a 20-year reauthorization, similar to my colleague over here, to really maximize the certainty that AGOA brings to the business environment. We believe that with greater certainty, African governments can expand on special economic zones and industrial parks and attract more American investors. And these investors can utilize these sites for exports, integrate African markets into their global value chains in terms of planning, and also secure better financing for their ventures. And within the agriculture sector, where I spend most of my time, we have a couple of recommendations that I want to share. The first one is improving phytosanitary requirements in terms of the support so that folks can have a better understanding of how to navigate and just make it a much easier process. We also want to encourage the growth of agriculture processing ecosystems. We've heard this morning a lot of people talking about value addition, talking about manufacturing, and really incorporating that into the ecosystem when it comes to Africa's ability to strengthen their value chains. And the last thing we recommend is encouraging U.S. processors to source crops from AGOA-eligible countries. And I also just want to lastly talk about how AGOA is really critically important to supporting women and entrepreneurs on the continent. In our business model, by working with the groups that we work with and supporting women, it would be incredibly hard to do that. We're working in some of the most isolated communities with groups of women who typically are underserved and typically do not have a lot of options or opportunities to generate income. And so our jobs would be much harder if we had to bring in African goods and pay high tariffs to do that. And so with that, I will turn to my colleague, Kate, who will talk about utilization. Thank you.
Please, go ahead, Dr. Tulin.
Hi, good morning. I'm Dr. Kate Tulenko. I'm CEO of Corvus Health, which is a health workforce firm that works to address the global health worker shortage and maldistribution. And on the PAC DBIA, I represent the health sector, the education sector, women-owned businesses, and also small businesses. And the small and women-owned businesses are often the businesses that are least able to take advantage of AGOA. And in order to increase their utilization of AGOA, we recommend 4 actions. These actions are outreach to underutilizing countries, sectors, and firms, development of national plans, plans at the national sector and individual firm level, funding and technical support to underutilizing governments and firms, and also streamlining the AGOA regulations to make it easier for small businesses to access AGOA and take advantage of it. We really need to help the countries develop these plans. The evidence shows that countries like Zambia and Togo, which have done a consultative process with the private sector and created and publicized plans, are the most highest users of AGOA. So we really want them to encourage that, and also to encourage the countries to include in the discussions companies that actually have foreign investment, including, of course, U.S. investment. We also would like Congress to better support the USA investment and trade hubs. These hubs can really increase their efforts on trade facilitation activities. We know that already these hubs have been very impactful, and I should note these hubs are funded differently and not straight through AGOA. But for example, the East Africa Trade and Investment Hub has increased exports by 600 million, and increased new investment by 171 million. So we do see impact with these hubs that work directly with small firms to help them export to the U.S. And also part of the technical assistance that's needed is to help countries develop regulatory frameworks to ease the entry of African products into the U.S. Many of the speakers have addressed this, how it can be very complex, especially with agricultural products, to get them into the U.S. And so countries actually need processes to certify things as organic or to, to ensure that food is safe. But lastly, I want to say that we need a more robust campaign within the U.S. to make U.S. businesses aware of these opportunities to either invest in the AGOA-eligible countries or to trade with companies that are coming out of these countries. And my last point, as someone in a service sector, is one thing we would love to see. We know it's not possible in this version of AGOA, but maybe in a future version, to have services included in AGOA as well, particularly educational services. Thank you.
Dr. Terlenko, thank you very much. Brian, if you could maybe wrap us up with your 2 or 3 minutes.
Fantastic. And I'll pick up right where Kate left off. First, I want to thank our host at the Corporate Council on Africa and USIP for putting on the Private Sector Forum. It's an honor to be here. My name is Breon Dawson. I am at Google in the emerging markets role, where I cover Africa as part of a global portfolio. And I thought that what I would do is first just provide a little bit of context for the remarks that I'm about to deliver on the digital sector. We're so proud to be members of the PACT-BIA, where we have been considering as the Council recommendations that will help to modernize AGOA in the digital sector and services in particular, which Kate just mentioned. But also, I wanted to put this in the context of the opportunity that we see for digital transformation across the African continent, drawing from our perspective, investing on the continent for over 2 decades, almost since our inception as a company. So just to put that a finer frame on that, Google has been investing in digital infrastructure, also in human capital and skilling, and finally also in enabling the regulatory environment to seed the market for deeper digital transformation. In the area of infrastructure, I'll just put a fine point on the investments we've been making in subsea cables. Our Equiano cable, which connects West Africa to the continent of Europe, and the work that we are doing on the Umoja cable, which we recently announced, that connects East Africa to Australia for the first time, enables digital connectivity for a continent that's been historically plagued by fragility in internet connectivity. This type of connectivity can not only uplift the quality of life for Africans that depend on digital connectivity, but also has the potential to expand access to services for retailers and for others that are already benefiting from the extensive benefits that AGOA offers. We made a $1 billion investment commitment, and we're deepening our commitment across each of these areas. And honored to be partnering with so many in the room, including our colleagues over at KEPSA that have been helping us with digital skilling and other areas where we're deeply invested. Let me specifically now turn to the recommendations layer that you posed around the Council's recommendations on digital services. While AGOA currently focuses on goods trade, the PACT-BIA has been considering how to modernize AGOA and expand the benefits of it to include ICT and digital services. This is one of the most exciting areas of growth, and it certainly wasn't considered when AGOA was first enacted. 1 in 5 people on Earth, as has already been mentioned, will be African, and by 2050, more than 1/3 of the world's working population will be in Africa. But just to also speak to the number of African internet users, that's projected to grow from 300 to 800 million. And not only are those users median age 20, they are also mobile first. And so the mobile economy directly supported 1.4 million jobs and has already contributed $170 billion. That's about 8% of GDP. And we anticipate, by some estimates, that that's projected to grow by 2030 to roughly 210 billion. So that has a huge opportunity for African markets to tap into those economic benefits by modernizing AGOA with digital services. It has also, with digital acceleration, helped stitch African nations into the global communications architecture and created democratized access to information, inclusive connectivity, and a diverse array of economic potentialities. And also I should mention that with the groundbreaking regulatory frameworks that we already see underway, including the Digital Trade Protocol of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, the artificial intelligence strategy of the African Union, and the AU Startup Policy Framework. African leaders are already putting digital transformation at the forefront of their agenda. And so also with the support that we see from the US government and the Digital Transformation with Africa initiative, there's also quite a lot of opportunity to capture value here. Let me quickly and finalize here on the ICT recommendations. As I said, we are looking at the three specific areas that I'll touch on quickly. First, sorry. As I mentioned, we're already focusing on the service sector and looking at ways to incorporate that. Sorry.
Or maybe just sum up.
Yeah, I will just say that we see potential for small and medium businesses. We focus on goods trade. Africa's fast-growing population obviously has an opportunity here. Yeah, I'll come back to a couple of other recommendations.
Okay. Well, I think, thank all of you very much for those contributions. I think, again, the whole point of this panel was just to underscore how active associations are, I think, both in Africa as well as here in the United States, in terms of really thinking through not just where we are today, what needs to be done today to really get a lot more trade and investment happening, but also kind of the longer term. I think maybe just to offer a very quick summary, I heard a really strong emphasis on the importance of predictability and also sustainability. I think the point is companies need to know what's happening, and so Paul, I'm completely taking your point that renewing AGOA in 2024 is a great way to give companies a lot of the kind of clear signal that they need, and particularly if it's for a longer time. I think I heard 20 years recommended, et cetera. I think also really clear to be aware of the impact not just on trade but on investment, that this trade does lead to investment in both directions, and to be aware basically in looking at AGOA provisions not to do anything to disrupt existing investment, and in fact to go quite the other way, to look for ways to build on current investment, because there seems to be a lot of room, a lot of headroom. And I think I heard, even if you will, sort of beyond AGOA or in future stages of whatever that relationship looks like, including things like capturing services, et cetera. So again, please join me in thanking our panelists, both online with Victor and on the stage. I think it's been a very robust discussion, and we very much appreciate your attention.
Well, there's going to be just three of us, right?